Welcome back to episode 7, Tar Heel History. I'm Brian Avery, and I'm teaching you today about the boxing system in the turpentine business. Remember, turpentine really, in the beginning, it was only medicinal and used to dilute tar and paint. So there was a little of it made in the early days here in the 1700s. But later on in the 1830s, when whale oil got scarce and they couldn't find whales for lamp oil in the homes, they had to combine alcohol and turpentine and make a lamp oil called camphene, which really caused the business to take off. Like I said, you could buy land in these bottoms with no farmland available that still had trees on it. You could buy it for $2.50. Tar and pitch, it got up to about $1.70 a gallon in 1807, and they were guaranteed up to $2.20 out of Wilmington a barrel for those products. Turpentine was at 37 cents a gallon in 1807, and so it was getting very, very, very scarce all over the world. And right here we had, remember, 90 million acres of longleaf pines. Living pines is what you make turpentine out of. Tar and pitch is made out of the dead pine tree hearts, like we showed you in the other episodes. But turpentine, you went to the living tree. Now, I'm going to show you what boxes are this morning and explain to you how these reservoirs were cut. This tree right here and this tree right here, we actually worked when it was living, and the man was going to cut the timber, so they cut the trees down and we cut these out of the tree to use as display models to teach with. So those two on the left and right of the one in the center, we actually worked the faces on them, and you can see they filled with resin, became hard, fat light wood, where we're working with the hacks. This one is actually an original that came out of the woods, and we cut it down and brought it here. It's a tree heart, solid fat lighter, but it was one that was worked for turpentine years ago. It's got the box and the face. So we're going to show you how they did it and basically how these boxes worked. At turpentine, and you had a box and you worked the face above it, but originally you would cut a box. The box is a hole in the base of the tree about a foot above the ground, and you would cut in and down and form a pocket. That pocket was to catch this resin coming down the face of the tree. It was just a catch hole so that you could, a reservoir, so you could get the resin out after you worked the face. A box was, in these cases, are smaller, but on the larger pine trees that were huge, your box would be 7-8 inches deep, 12 to 14 inches across this way, and 3 to 4 inches this way from the face to the face of the tree. Okay, and that resin's going to run down and seep down in here and pond in this box. Boxes were cut November, December, and January. The reason for this is the resin was down in the tree in the wintertime. It's like other trees, it doesn't run as much sap or resin in the wintertime. And if you cut these boxes in the summertime, you open the pores down below this wood, and this resin can run down through the box, go into the stump, into the roots, and turn them to light wood, causing it not to draw moisture up to the face to make the resin that you're after in the first place. So you're basically shooting yourself in the foot if you cut these boxes in the spring or summer. November, December, January, you could cut them, and a little bit of resin will seep into them, but not much, but enough that it'll turn the box to fat light wood, which causes it to get what they called solid. You wanted a solid box before springtime when you came in here to work your face. That way the resin couldn't go any further than that box. It wouldn't go down into the tree. See, this resin soaks into any wood that it gets on and turns it hard into fat lighter, that natural defense system against bugs, okay? So that's why this exists. This tree was worked, the resin soaked into the face of this tree, turned it to fat light wood, the same thing we make tar out of, because it's full of this resin that has turned hard. So to get a solid box, they called them solid cured boxes, and what it meant was you wanted enough resin in here in the wintertime to soak into this and stop and turn it hard. So the spring, when you came in here to work this, these boxes, that resin couldn't go any further down in the tree when it ran out. Now the box was the problem. Not that it killed the tree, it doesn't kill the tree, it just, you know, weakens the tree, because they would cut a box, you're going to lay your hand down, go to the end of your hand, cut another box. You're going to leave a certain amount of this bark between them so it'll keep feeding the tree, keep tree alive. But when you have a box here and a box on the back of this tree, you've got a weak spot in the tree, so when the winds would come, it would break them off in the boxes. This itself doesn't kill the tree, but it weakens it in a storm, okay? That was one of the problems. The other problem was we had forest fires. Forest fires raged, and people couldn't stop them even if they wanted to back then. I mean, the lightning would strike in the woods would catch fire, it would burn in here. Well, the longleaf pine is naturally fireproof in its state with this thick bark. It loves fire because it cleans the ground off and all the competition and allows the seeds to hit the ground like we talked about in earlier videos. But when you've got this box open a foot from the ground, sitting there with turpentine resin in it, oleo resin out of this tree, which is flammable, now a basically fireproof tree has become a torch. The fires would burn up to them. If you left the trash piled up around these boxes, the fires would burn up to them, jump in the box, set that resin on fire, heat the face, get it to pouring the resin out. That would catch fire, and now a fireproof, basically fireproof tree is now a torch. So the other thing that got the longleaf pine were forest fires, okay, because you couldn't stop them, and especially if they got in the woods where you were turpentining 10,500 trees, they're going to jump from box to box if the ground's not cleared. So they would get kids to go in the summertime when they were turpentining these trees. The kids would go in there with a broad hoe like this and drag the trash, the old leaves and mess, away from the base of these boxes, so that if a forest fire did come through, it didn't have the fuel to jump it up here into the box, okay? I used a broad hoe. Okay, it turns wintertime. You're making tar and pitch out of dead, fat, lighted tree hearts, okay, in mounds. The other thing you're doing, you have stopped working the face of the trees because you're going to quit that September 10th. Turpentine season went from April 10th in the deep south to September 10th, and after that, if you work these faces anymore, you're opening them up to the winter cold and ice and snow and everything. So they want you to cut it off to preserve your tree. You cut it off September 10th. You quit turpentine in the face, okay? November, December, January, cold months, you're going to come in here and you're going to take an axe like this, a boxing axe, and there's several different lengths and widths, but okay, these are two. This is a shorter, smaller one. This is the longer one. So you would start out with your short axe, cutting in and down, okay? And that's going to start you and get you going. And then you're going to go to an axe like this on the larger trees, that you're going to make this box 7 to 8 inches deep, 12 to 14 inches wide, and 3 to 4 inches in and out. So you're going to use the long boxing axe after the short one, okay? That's going to get you on down in the tree. Next, you're going to take a broad axe and come in here, right here, and you're going to come and cut down a face to that box. You can see here where they did it. That's called cornering the box. And all you're doing is flattening this surface so that the resin's going to run down and run into that box. Now, this went on through the 1800s in North Carolina. As the trees diminished, as you got so far up the tree cutting the streaks, that resin wasn't getting to the box. It was drying on the face, which only makes half the turpentine. You wanted the resin dip, the virgin dip that came right out of these lower streaks, liquid into this box, made twice as much turpentine as any that the air got to coming down the trunk. So when you got so high on them, it didn't make any financial sense to keep working the trees. And so basically that's when they would cut them for timber and make river rafts out of them. And they also sold this timber to England to build ships and homes and everything else. And England wanted this heart pine. It was great for ships and stuff because it's basically waterproof. And so when you would turpentine them so high that it wasn't getting down here and profitable anymore, you would cut the trees, turn them into timber, drag them down to the river, square them up, throw them in there, make a log raft, put your products on them, go to Wilmington, sell them to the British, and the people in Boston and New York used it, and people out west used it to build homes and houses as they moved out west. But through the 1800s, we diminished the longleaf pine in North Carolina, and the late 1800s, this practice had moved to South Carolina and Georgia, and then on into Florida, Alabama, Texas. Everywhere that 90 million acres was is where they started moving to turpentining. And if you turpentined for a living, you went with the industry when it left here. That's why a lot of people down in Georgia, Florida, and Alabama trace their ancestry back to North Carolina in the turpentine industry, but they left with it, and you got down there and they basically would go through the woods and build train tracks, and you would live in a village or a camp, and you would do this for a living every day. And then when you worked out this patch of woods so high it wouldn't work anymore and they're going to cut it for timber, they would move your village, they would lift your house and everything, put it on a train and go further down the new tracks and start in a new pile of trees down there that had never been worked, new acreage. And so that's how it kept moving south, was because of turpentine. Now, these boxes, like I said, were the demise of the pine trees. In 1899, a guy named Charles Holmes Hershey, okay? He was a chemistry teacher at the University of Georgia in Athens, okay? He went on a sabbatical, they called it, over to Germany to study some applied science chemistry, okay? He went over there, and one of his professors, when they were talking in a conversation about where he was from and stuff, he called the turpentine industry butchery. He said it's not an industry, it's butchery, the way they're cutting those boxes and destroying the, the goose that laid the golden egg. I mean, it was just common knowledge to him. And Hershey lived in Georgia. He didn't know anything about it. He'd never studied it. So he went out, started studying the farms, seeing what they were doing with the boxes. He became part of our Forestry Service in 1901, and basically did a study on this and came up with a new method of turpentine orcharding. He wrote a report on it to the Forestry Service, and they did a study, and they took a farm in Acilla, Georgia, split it in half. Half of the farm, they boxed the trees like this to do the test, and then the other half, he had a new type system that he wanted to try. He went down to Florida to the Turpentiners Convention, and he said, "Men, you've only got about 15 years left in business, because that's all the trees there are left. Out of 90 million acres, they were over half gone, and this virgin timber was not being replaced. They were not replanting trees, and so they were just going through them as fast as they could move, because now all your industries use turpentine in factories and building things and soap products and makeup, you name it. It was used all over. Vicks Vapor Rub had turpentine in it. So it had become a big industry now, and it was affecting the whole world. And they used it for medicinal purposes as well, and so making rubber, you name it, they used turpentine all over the world. And so this industry grew huge in the early 1900s and was getting rid of most of the trees. And so he tried at the Turpentiners Convention, he said in 1901, he said, "I've come up with a new method of doing this from studying how they do it in France and all over the world." And he said, "These boxes, if you don't stop boxing these trees, if you will listen to what I've got to say, we'll save a bunch of them, and we can start replanting." And so they told him to go away. They didn't care. They had plenty of axes and mends. They didn't need no pots and tins. But basically what Hershey had was a clay pot system, and you would go in here, rather than having this box here, you would leave this hole, you would come up here, cut a slash in the tree, put tins in the face, and then hang this pot under here. And this is called a Hershey pot, because he invented this system. He bought the Chattanooga Pot Company in Tennessee, moved it to Georgia, started making these pots and selling to them. Okay, and so the second time, after he did his experiment, what he found was he got 23.5% more profits his way than the old way. And the reason for that was, remember I told you that you wanted to stay under this virgin dip. Well, you can't move this box up the tree, okay? You can't. It's stable down here. But this pot and tins, you can get the liquid turpentine here that's liquid, then you can move these up the tree and move your pot up here and stay under the liquid resin, which makes twice as much turpentine when it's cooked off in a steel, okay? So Hershey went back in 1902 with his facts and figures from the test he did, and all of a sudden the whole turpentine industry all over the South in southern states switched over, because the 23.5% the first year would pay for the tins and the cups. And after that, of course, they're going to get 23.5% every year after that. That's their profits. So this is the resin out of one of our trees. So you can see how this system, without this box, would save the pine trees, because working the face doesn't kill the tree. It doesn't hurt the tree if you do it in the summertime, and you don't want to do it in the wintertime. Just like you don't want to cut your boxes in the summertime. You want to cut them in the wintertime. And so this was called the Hershey pot, And he manufactured these in Georgia and sold them to all the turpentiners, and then sold the business out. And Hershey eventually, from 1905 to 1916, was in North Carolina at UNC teaching their chemistry department. And he was the Dean of Applied Sciences from 1905 to 1908, I think. 1908 to 1911. And but his name is Charles Holmes Hershey, and this is a book you can get on his life from the University of Georgia, and there's some still left out there, and a new method of turpentine orcharding. This is why they call it gum. In this state, you see it's almost like chewing gum. When resin dries out a little bit on the face of a tree, that's what they come back and harvest in the fall, wintertime, called scrape or gum. And people would chew this as chewing gum way back in those days. They actually, some of the older people, when I was a kid, still would go out to the trees and get this and chew it for chewing gum. It was thought to be helpful, okay? Sorry about saying okay. All right, the tins. Hershey came up with his own system. He had his own axe. This is one of Hershey's axes that was used to lay up here on the face of the tree. You take a sledgehammer and hit it, drive it in there, or a mallet, wooden mallet, and drive it in, and that left you a place to stick your tins, okay? Later on, Council Tool down here in Wananish, North Carolina, around Lake Waccamaw, came up with a Hershey axe similar to Hershey's axe, but it was shaped like a moon. That's so it would lay around the tree without having to flatten this to put your tins in. This curved axe and their curved tins would follow the face of the tree. Okay, they were shaped like the tree is shaped instead of straight. Council Tool, who made many turpentine tools over the years. 1886, they started in making turpentine tools. They would make them here in North Carolina, ship them to Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, and sell them down there. Later on, there were several different inventions, different iron, clay, galvanized tins came about. Galvanized pots came about, so they did away with the clay pots. These wouldn't freeze and bust in the wintertime if you left water in them. And so as the industry progressed in Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, you got all these different inventions that helped make the job simpler. And the boxes were gone, so that was not done anymore. You just came in there and put your tins in and started your face above it. The resin run down the tin, run into your can, box, whatever you had here, your clay pots to start with, okay? All right, next, hacks. The first hacks were called round shapes. This is one of the very first that were solid round, okay? And this one is very close to it. And you took a round shave, and what they called, once you got your box or pot, they called it chipping. And you would come in here and start your face right above your box with your first streak. That's going to cut through the bark, through this first layer here, and give you about a week's worth of resin that's going to run like water from the tree heart, and it's going to run down here into your box. After about the third or fourth week, those boxes would be nearly full and would have close to a quart of resin. And after the fourth week, you come in here and do your dipping and take it back to the still. where you're going to cook it in a whiskey still in somewhere in this location in the woods. When you had turpentine trees as much as they were valuable to you, you'd gone so far up that the resin's not coming down to the box. The only thing the tree was good for then that could be sold was timber. So they would cut these trees down, saw them down, and then they would take a broad axe like this. All right, they're going to come in here and flatten the top of the log with the broad axe. Then they're going to come in here and flatten the sides of this log. On 3 sides, it's going to be square. On the bottom, they left it round, okay? So they could go over the rocks in the river, so they didn't care. But the top 3 sections, you wanted to take a broad axe and flatten them straight. Because you're going to carry this log with a mule, you're going to hook to it, pull it down there to the river, put it in the river, drill a hole through it right here, push them all together on the flat sides, and when you push them all together, it's going to make a log raft. You're going to take a sapling tree and shove through these holes in the ends of it, wedge it on the outside on both sides, put your ropes around it, which is going to make a river raft with a flat bed on top that you put dirt up on so you can build a fire. You're going to pitch tin on it. You're going to get your rifle. You're going to load your tar pitch turpentine on top of this raft. And then you're going to start a 2-week journey down to Wilmington, where you're going down there with this raft full of your tar pitch turpentine in the spring when the rivers flooded. The freshets, they called them, came in and raised the water above the rocks. So all winter you're going to make tar and pitch. Summer you're going to make turpentine and rosin. We're going into rosin next. Okay, then you're going to put all these, cut this timber, put it together, make you a log raft during the winter, so that when it comes summertime, springtime, and the floods come in the rivers and raise the water up above the rocks, you're going to take these rafts, hook 4 or 5 of them together, go down the river to Wilmington, and of course you got to live on that raft for a couple of weeks, so you're going to build fires on that dirt you throw up here, sleep in your tent, cook your own food, take your rifle to hunt squirrel and rabbit with, so you have plenty to eat, and you're going down there, and when you get down there to the docks, a British proctor is going to tell you where to unload your tar, where to unload your pitch, where to unload your turpentine barrels, and where to leave these rafts, because they're going to buy them also. And then once you sold everything you had, you're going to turn around, take your money, and walk back up that river all the way back to wherever you live and get started again on your next journey. It could take you a week, it could take you 2 weeks to walk back home and get started again, and then that was a year in the life of naval store production. Now this is an original log given to me by a friend that came out of the river over here close to the house that was part of a log raft. And you can see what I was telling you, flat, 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 and rounded on the bottom. You flatten 3 sides of it. This is the 2-inch auger that was used to drill your hole through it. And the way you did that was like this, with your hands. And when you had drilled holes through all your logs, slid them up together in a pile, so you got a flat bed here, they'll fit flat here, and the next one will fit flat here. You've got your 2-inch auger hole through the side of it. You push them all together, shove you a green tree, small sapling tree through them, and wedge it together outside, and that held your raft together. Thank you. We appreciate you watching these videos, and we appreciate it if you would tell your friends about them that are interested in our history in this state. And we ask, if you will, to subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell signal over there where it'll notify you when these things are coming out. We're trying to do 1 a week, okay? Thank you again from North Carolina.